The bloodshed in the Gaza Strip is over. Israeli bombing has ceased, as have the crimes of Hamas terrorists. Long-awaited peace has arrived here. People who fled the bombing are returning to their homes. My daughter and son are injured, and I need to help them. Now I can, because the war is over. Joy, also on the other side of the border. In Israel, Israeli civilians still held captive by Palestinian criminals will soon return home. It is not known how many of them are still alive, but Hamas terrorists have less than 2 days to release the hostages and return the bodies of the victims to their families. This man has been waiting for 2 years for the return of his kidnapped son by Hamas terrorists who brutally attacked Israel 2 years ago. I feel love overwhelming me. All this time I believed that I would get my son back. I had tremendous support from people. Without it, I wouldn't have been able to endure it. The Israeli army is leaving the Gaza Strip, and the most inaccessible regions are receiving humanitarian aid for the first time in a long time. The Gaza Strip was a battlefield, and now it is a symbol of an emerging peace. A new order is also to be established here. In exchange for amnesty, Hamas members are to lay down their arms, while the Palestinian population would be administered by the Peace Council, whose main figure is of course Donald Trump, who uses his authority to emphasize the importance of this peaceful settlement. There would be no chance for peace in the region if it weren't for the Republicans' decisive actions. Donald Trump both tempered the Israeli military offensive in Gaza and led to a significant weakening of Hamas. Both sides agreed to a peace plan, which is currently being implemented in line with Washington's expectations.
I was just dealing with people from the Middle East, Arab people and other people on the potential peace deal for the Middle East. Peace for the Middle East, that's a beautiful phrase, and we hope it's going to come true, but it's very close. And they're doing very well. We have a great team over there, great negotiators, and there are unfortunately great negotiators on the other side also. But it's something I think that will happen.
On Monday morning, Donald Trump plans to appear in Tel Aviv to personally oversee the peace process. Trump's peace plan is indeed a breakthrough in these 2 years of impotence and hopelessness in the Gaza war. The plan is being praised, and rightly so, because it is, in a way, brilliant. But more importantly, it is multi-stage and well thought out. There was a very methodical approach to supporting Israel when it was needed and condemning it when it was needed. But above all, there was a more long-term strategic approach, dismantling the threat from Iran as a state that supports terrorism, wiping out the Hamas leadership. Donald Trump did what he could to help the ordinary people of the Gaza Strip and bring relief to the suffering Israeli families who are waiting for the return of their loved ones kidnapped by Hamas. How long the peace in the region will last depends primarily on whether the intentions of reconciliation between the warring parties are sincere. Concerns about the implementation of the Migration Pact are growing. Polish people are fed up with blindly obeying Brussels. They fear that in the name of EU decisions, they may lose what is most precious to them, their security. There is the issue of immigration, which is set to happen soon. Today, Donald Tusk, who not so long ago said that Poland would have to be punished because that is the law, because our government managed to prevent this agreement from coming into force. And this lasted for many years. Today, he suddenly announces that next year we will not have immigration. Don't be fooled. Don't be fooled. These are old games. The migration threat is real. The Migration Pact, which was intended to bring order to immigration policy, is in fact causing increasing concern. All it takes is just going west and seeing what they have done, and they want to do exactly the same thing here. They want to leave those migrants they need at home, and we saw how they pushed out those they didn't need at home and even burdened Poles with the costs of this policy. This is why the entire Migration Pact must be thrown in the trash, and Tusk's policy must be fought against, because he will do everything Germany wants. And Poland does not want to repeat Germany's mistakes and take on the burden of other people's mistakes. After all, it was not the Poles who decided to open the European borders in 2015. It was not the Poles who made the decisions that are now resulting in the security crisis in Paris, Berlin, and Stockholm. I lived and stayed in Western countries. I see what is happening. I gave up on those countries and came here so that we wouldn't have to deal with this, so that we wouldn't have to see what is happening there. It's simply for us, for our children and our women. The Migration Pact is causing particular concern among women. In Western European countries that have previously accepted large groups of immigrants, there has been an increase in the number of cases of sexual assault and violence against women. Poland, until now considered one of the safest places in Europe, fears a repeat of these scenarios. We don't want a repeat of what happened to that young woman in Toruń. I am a mother, and I would like to feel safe in our country, as I have done so far, when I go for a walk with my child and come back safely from that walk. We as women above all, because it is well known that attacks on women are mainly caused by migrants, and we want to feel safe. The border defense movement takes care of our safety, reminding us that a country that does not protect its own borders is unable to protect its own citizens. If we do not resist this, we will face rape, murder, looting, fear, anxiety, terror, and we will perish in the abyss of madness that has engulfed the West at this moment. That is why we must stop the Migration Pact. It is not a question of whether we can or cannot. We must stop the Migration Pact. This is not a rebellion against Europe, but against an attempt to take away the right of member states to decide for themselves. We must learn from the West what they are doing wrong and try to constantly improve and prevent it. Poland cannot become, as Prime Minister Donald Tusk once said, a second Paris. We cannot allow ourselves to become a second Paris, a second Marseille. That is why, in order to prevent the Migration Pact, Poles have taken matters into their own hands. As President John F. Kennedy once said, ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country, and we must unite and never give up. For now, we can feel safe in Poland, but more and more often, many Poles fear that Brussels will start deciding our fate. Today we have shown that we can take matters into our own hands and unite. We have stood up to defend our borders and our daily peace. This could be the beginning of the end of global trade and economic exchange as we have known it for decades. China has just done what analysts around the world have been warning about for years. It is about tightening control over rare earth elements mined by China and used in the production of electronic components in most of the devices we use. In order to use them or use components that contain them, it will be necessary to obtain a license issued by China. Applications from companies that use them in the arms industry will be automatically rejected. If the exchange of blows between China and the United States in the first half of this year seemed like a roller coaster ride to analysts, an avalanche is now approaching that could drag global markets into the abyss. China has just announced that it is tightening control over the market for rare earth elements, those used in the construction of integrated circuits and electronic components in virtually everything that contains electronics. The problem is that China is currently the largest producer and supplier of these elements.
There's a lot of catch-up that needs to happen, right? A lot of the expertise for refining and processing is currently in China. And that makes sense because most of the value-added processing has been happening in China for the past few decades.
And that is what China is exploiting, its monopoly position. Beijing wants to issue licenses for the use of its elements or components that use them in global production. Companies that cooperate in any way with the NATO or US defense sector will not receive a license. What this means for an arming Europe, for example, is no secret. Without technology, there is no way to produce anything. It has just been learned that China has taken an extraordinarily aggressive position on trade in sending an extremely hostile letter to the world, stating that they were going to, effective November 1st, 2025, impose large-scale export controls on virtually every product they make, and some not even made by them. This affects all countries, without exception, and it was obviously a plan devised by them years ago. It is absolutely unheard of in international trade, and a moral disgrace in dealing with other nations. The Americans were the first to react, and very sharply. U.S. President Donald Trump announced the imposition of 100% retaliatory sanctions on China, and if anyone thinks that we are returning to the trade war of a few months ago, they are greatly mistaken. The Americans have no idea what the Chinese are up to and what their goal is.
They hit the world with something that really is not anything that people are going to do, and it was shocking. I can tell you, Howard and I and Todd, we all, Scott, we were all speaking about it before, and we said, where did that come from? It was just, that was out of the blue, right? Out of the blue, they came up with this whole import-export concept, and nobody knew anything about it.
If Americans don't know what China is playing at, then the world has a problem. China does not make such decisions suddenly on impulse or without calculating the risks. They have a hidden agenda that has been devised and developed at the highest levels of the party. Considering the moves made towards Moscow and Pyongyang, the conclusion is deeply disturbing. It looks as if someone in China has just pulled the handbrake on the development of Western military technology.